Now that we have our woven images completed as a contour line drawing on our grid paper, our next step is to get rid of the graph lines. Looking at my example here, you can see that there are some lines that are now a little bit darker. You're not going to get rid of all of your graph lines because we need to know where the ending of one image that was woven in against another image. We need to know where those borders are. So you can see here that I've just lightly come in with my pencil and I've just slightly darkened up those parts of the graph that show me where one drawing ends and the other one begins. So you can see here is my area that is flower, and then I have my hand in this section, back to flower in this section. I have a couple parts of the flower here in the middle, and more flower down along the bottom leading up to the left side. And then of course the hand is in this area. So once I've identified, and again, I don't want these super dark, I want them to just be slightly darker than our already done graph lines. Then I'm going to come in with an eraser and I'm going to carefully erase the graph lines inside of my drawings. So I'm identifying the grid lines that separate our two images, and then the other grid lines I'm going to come in and carefully erase these so that they are no longer showing on my drawing. Once that is complete, we are ready to discuss what we're doing with our black and white mediums in regards to this project. Now that I've identified the edges of my two grids and erased the light 1-inch grid lines inside of each of those grids, I'm ready to start applying value to my contour line drawing. So I'm going to still want to have my weave drawing photo reference available to me because I need to observe the lights and the darks and all the different gray values in between as I apply value. For your project, you need to choose two of your black and white mediums. You can use charcoal and pencil. You can use pen and ink and charcoal. You can use pen and ink and pencil. But you need to use two different black and white mediums on this project. What you'll do is you will select one of your two images. So in my case, if I were to select my flowers, I would then choose which of the two mediums I want to use, and of those two mediums, which one will I use to complete my flowers. So I was considering using pen and ink and charcoal. Being that my flowers are the lighter of the two images, I want to use the pen and ink on my flowers because I feel I can get much lighter values. I will definitely have less chance of smudging. So I'll be able to keep the paper a little bit whiter during the application process. And if my other medium does end up being charcoal, then that would leave the hands for me to use charcoal mediums with. Now, when you choose your two mediums, you need to consider the mediums themselves. So if I do use pen and ink and charcoal, I will probably want to complete my pen and ink part of my drawing first, because charcoal smears a lot. And if I have a lot of charcoal on here from completing the hands in charcoal, I'm going to end up moving over top of those areas and possibly smearing the charcoal everywhere. If you're choosing pen and ink and pencil, again, I would probably go with pen and ink first, because again, pencil will smear. If you choose to do pencil and charcoal, then I would do the pencil first. Of the two, though they both have the tendency to smear, pencil will be the least dusty of the two mediums. So once you have identified the edges of your two images, erased the other graph lines inside of those images, you're ready to start applying value. So your first step is to choose your two mediums. Once you have chosen your two mediums, then you need to choose which medium will go with which image. And of the two mediums, which will be the less messy to put down first before moving on to the messier of the two. Okay, now that I have decided on my two materials, I am going to go with pen and ink and charcoal. It is time for me to start applying the values to my project. Now, since I am using pen and ink, there are several types of pen and ink application techniques that I can use. And what I did was, recently Michaels had some microns on sale, so I went and purchased a couple of sets. And since I've never really used the micron before, I took a piece of paper and I tried some things out. So first I gave myself an idea of what the dot size was with that, and tried some stippling. I tried a little bit more of I almost consider it an opposite technique, in that stippling is very controlled placement, and scribbling, though you do have to show control, is a little bit more freer of a movement with your pen. And then line thickness, and I thought I'd see what it looked like with some cross hatching. Did some quick little tiny circles to see what the hatching, cross hatching looked like with each pen. Tried a little bit of just shading with the circles. And then over here, I was demonstrating to my other students the difference in what we mean in control when it comes to pen and ink. So no matter what technique of pen and ink you choose, if you are using pen and ink on your project, I should reiterate, remember, it's not a requirement, it is a choice. But if you are using pen and ink on your project, remember, you want control. So even if it was something as simple as a sketch, really quick, of a flower, and let's say I did really like the scribbling technique, that doesn't mean, because the term scribbling is very deceptive, that doesn't mean I'm going to come in and be like, oh yeah, I'm really dark here, oh, got lighter, oh look, there's my petals, done, my flower's done. No. Even though pen and ink has certain techniques that can be a little bit more free in movement, have terms such as scribbling, which puts a certain image in your head, that doesn't mean that is showing skill. So when it comes to working with something, let's say you were going to use the scribbling technique, you still have to show control of your material. You still have to show control along your edges. So even if that was a technique you wanted to use for shading with a pen, you don't want to just rapidly apply it just like any other material we use. We want to show skill, we want to show thought when we do it. So you have to have control over your medium at all times. Just like in pencil drawing, you have to show control using the circular shading technique. In charcoal, you have to show control by using the circular shading technique. Pencil, we don't want to smudge or smear it at this level. Charcoal, that is something you can do with the medium, but you still want control when you do things like that. Also, what I want to mention to you is about texture. In my image references, most of my textures are, how do I want to put it? I want to say on a smoother surface, meaning even though my mother's hands show wrinkles, even though the center of the flowers have many small parts to them, and there's some texture on the flower petals and leaves, none of it is a long texture like hair or grass. So for when I do my shading, because of that smoother surface, and I say smoother in air quotes, meaning that it doesn't have a long stroke texture, I can control my medium, and my circular shading technique will be the most prevalent on here. When it comes to something like fur texture, what you want to do is you don't want to take the time to draw individual hairs unless individual hairs are showing up in the image. If you take a close look, if you have something that has hair, or if you have something with a longer texture like grass, in that you can do a lot of the work of form and movement with the circular shading technique. So a lot of this dog image that I did is circular shading technique, and it wasn't until areas like where light fur and dark fur met, or here where I needed some shading in to show more of the fur texture in the white area. Those are areas where I went to a little bit more of a directional shading. But I first laid down all of my layers with circular shading technique. I kept my values slightly lighter than what I was seeing on the image, so that I could then come in with a slight darker application of material to show hair growth, hair movement, edges where hair of different values overlap each other. So as you do this project, you want to show your best techniques no matter what material you are using. So I am going to start with my pen and ink technique, and we discussed this previously about which material you would start with once you choose your two. I need to have my photo reference where I can see it, and I'm ready to start applying my values. So I'm looking at my photo reference closer to see what kind of values I'm dealing with. And I'm going to go with the stippling technique. And I'm going to start carefully applying some value to my project. So stippling is the process of creating very small dots to create value changes. So I have a lighter gray value up here. I'm going with my smallest micron. And I'm going to start applying some dots for that lighter gray. Okay, so that is just the beginning. You do have some time to work on this. Do not leave this project to the very last minute. I'll remind you again that even if you are using a material that doesn't smear, and you do have to watch with pens, some inks do take a little bit more time to dry. So if you are using pen and ink, do be aware that some are not instantly drying. So you do have to watch using those. And even though I don't have another material on here other than my outline, I still always use a piece of paper underneath my hand to help protect my surface. Again, because even though this pencil is light, it's still going to smear some. And I don't want my hand movements to kind of erase my very light contour outlines. So I'm just going to continue to apply my mediums to my project.